I never wanted to be the center of attention, but they turned me into the villain just because I refused to stay silent. My name is Olivia. I'm 27 years old and work at a small publishing house on the outskirts of Seattle. If you asked anyone around me about Olivia, they'd say I'm the quiet type, agreeable, low maintenance, and that right there is the problem. I'm the eldest of 3 children. My parents, Elaine and Richard, own a small but beloved artisan cheese shop called Cream and Crust in our hometown of Fairdale. It's a cozy place and everyone in town knows it. Regulars still say this town smells like toasted bread, thanks to your family, Olivia. For a long time, I thought I was lucky to grow up in a family like that, warm, close-knit, and simple. But the truth is that warmth was reserved for one person. And it wasn't me, the golden boy and the shadow no one sees. My younger brother, Ethan, 25, is one of those people who seem born with a spotlight on them. Tall, charming, decent at sports, average at school, but adored by every teacher for reasons I never understood. Since childhood, Ethan was called the darling of the neighborhood. And me, I was quiet. Olivia always with her nose in a book. Anyone who's lived in a family with a golden child knows when one person gets all the shine, the rest fade into background noise. I wasn't mad at Ethan, he never asked for it. But the way my parents constantly excused his behavior even when he was clearly in the wrong taught me to stay silent. Silent to keep the peace. Silent to avoid ruining the mood. I still remember the time Ethan broke my phone and blamed the cat. When I confronted him, my mother sighed and said, "Why are you making a big deal? It's just a phone." He didn't mean to. But when it was me, if I forgot to take out the trash, I was irresponsible. If I missed a holiday call to my grandparents, I was insensitive. Ethan. He's under pressure. He's going through a lot. Cut him some slack. I wasn't jealous until they started acting like I didn't exist. For years, I told myself, it's fine. We all have our roles. I focused on my studies, worked hard, and became financially independent by 19 without asking my parents for a dime. Ethan, meanwhile, stayed at home, occasionally helping out at the shop, but mostly golfing, gaming, and going on lavish trips with his girlfriend, Ava. I didn't complain. I didn't want the spotlight. But things changed when I was 22 and my grandfather passed away. During the reading of his will, I learned he had left me a trust fund only accessible when I turned 30 and only for specific purposes like buying a house or pursuing further education. I cried not because of the money, but because he had seen me. Really seen me. The effort. The quiet striving no one else had ever acknowledged. I didn't brag. I simply noted it down in a little notebook alongside a dream I'd been harboring for years, to open a bookstore cafe where people could drink coffee, read in peace, and breathe in a world that wasn't rushing past them. But I was wrong. I thought I could keep that dream to myself until it was dragged into the open at a family dinner. A casual question and the beginning of a quiet war. "Olivia, I heard your grandpa left you some kind of trust fund. That's amazing. Do you have any plans for it yet?" Ava asked, smiling sweetly at a family dinner one evening. I nearly choked on my soup. No one besides me and the lawyer was supposed to know about that. I glanced at Ethan. He was scooping rice, avoiding my eyes. I smiled awkwardly. Nothing concrete. Maybe a small project later down the line. Ava's eyes sparkled. "You mean the bookstore cafe idea? That's adorable, but you know, Ethan and I are under a lot of financial stress. If you ever feel like helping out even just a little, it would mean so much. Something for the family." From friendly talk to calculated pressure, I laughed it off, thinking she was joking, but the look in her eyes wasn't playful, it was calculated. My parents glanced at each other and my mother broke the silence. "If Olivia could help, that'd be amazing. Your brother's getting married. We're all overjoyed. Helping him start off on the right foot would be such a generous thing to do." I went quiet, my chest suddenly heavy. Why was everyone treating my finances as something that naturally belonged to the whole family? From that night on, it got worse. Ava began weaving the trust fund into every conversation. That venue offers a discount if we book early, and Olivia could easily cover it. Or, when Ethan and I have kids, we know the family will support us, and I just know Olivia will be the first to step up. Somehow, I had become a walking bank account with no emotions. Ethan started changing too, and I realized I was just the sibling with money. At first, Ethan stayed neutral, but slowly he began echoing Ava. "We're not pressuring you, but you're in a position to do something meaningful with that money, right? What better way to use it than to bring the family together? By coercing me into giving away something my grandfather left me." I brought it up with my mom. She went quiet for a moment, then sighed. "Don't be so tense. Ava just wants to feel like part of the family. Try to understand her heart." I almost laughed. I couldn't remember the last time I was protected like that. Ava hadn't tried to fit in, she walked in like she already belonged. Meanwhile, I was starting to feel like the outsider in my own home. I began to wonder, was I being too sensitive? I confided in my best friend Lily, the one person who'd stood by me through everything. She listened, then asked Olivia, "Have you considered that you're being manipulated?" The word hit me like a brick. I had never applied it to my family, but the more I thought about it, the more it fit. The guilt tripping, the subtle undermining, the condescending tone. "It's not like you're using it right now. Ethan and Ava would be so happy. Don't you want that for them?" This wasn't about money. This was about boundaries. And like so many people raised to keep the peace, I had been taught that love means sacrifice. The first time I said no, the storm began to stir. I made it clear I couldn't and wouldn't use the trust fund for anyone but myself. Even if I couldn't access it yet, I had a vision for my life. Ava smiled tightly. "Oh, I understand. I just thought, if it were me, I'd do things differently." Ethan was silent, then messaged me, "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I didn't know if I was crying from anger, grief, or just sheer exhaustion. I only knew this when you learn to say no. You find out who really loves you and who only loves what you can give them. And this was only the beginning. I thought that once I said no, they'd back off, that they'd understand, that they'd respect my choice. But I underestimated Ava. She wasn't the type to take no for an answer. And Ethan, the boy who used to build Lego castles with me, was no longer the brother I thought I knew. I didn't realize it then, but everything was about to get much, much worse. They thought I'd eventually give in because that's what family does. But when family begins to dismantle the dreams you built piece by piece, you realize love doesn't mean surrender. Ever since I said no to Ava, the air in my family shifted. Dinners became strained, phone calls less frequent. No one said anything directly, but everyone said enough for me to know I was now the problem. The one who confused me the most wasn't Ava, it was Ethan. He wasn't the shy, warm little brother I once shielded from rain in 5th grade. The Ethan who now sat across from me lowered his voice and said, "Can't you just spare a little, just to help us through this? I promise I'll pay you back." I looked at him, heart tightening. Pay back with what fleeting gratitude, or a bond that would never be the same again? One dinner, 3 accusations, and once again, I was guilty by default. My parents invited me over for dinner. They said it was just a casual family night. I knew they wanted to talk about the trust fund, but a part of me hoped I was wrong. Dinner began with my favorite creamy mushroom pasta and Ethan's favorite roast, their way of setting the mood. After some strained small talk, my mother set her chopsticks down and said, "Olivia, we're trying to keep things peaceful, but you've been too rigid and it's making things awkward." I smiled thinly. "I'm not being rigid. I just don't want anyone taking something that doesn't belong to them." Ethan cut in. "I'm just sad that you don't see it. This isn't about money. It's about love." Ava placed a gentle hand on Ethan's and added, Olivia, I truly believe that if you helped, everything would work itself out. Work itself out. Did they really think handing over money would fix everything? No one saw me. The woman who had lived quietly, carried her own burdens, never asked for help, as someone to be respected. They just saw an ATM named Olivia. I started fearing that my dream was no longer mine. That night, I slumped onto my couch, staring at the ceiling. On the table lay my plan for the bookstore cafe floor, sketches, budget breakdowns, and photos of a little shop in Portland I'd always admired. I'd always imagined it a cozy space where people could slow down with a book, a latte, and a touch of soft jazz playing in the background. But now every time I looked at that dream, I saw Ava's face. Her wide eyes, her honey-sweet voice. You don't need the money now, and we're just starting out. They weren't attacking my finances with force, but with redefined emotions. Love isn't about handing over your future just to be accepted. Soon, the entire town started to know my story, and I became the nameless villain. I wasn't sure what Ava had been telling people, but it didn't take long for the whispers to spread. I started getting strange looks at the local cafe. A girl I went to high school with texted me. Heard you're keeping all that money to yourself while your brother's struggling. That true? I didn't answer. Not because silence is golden, but because I knew. When a story is told from only one side, silence gets mistaken for guilt. I realized this wasn't just a family issue anymore. It had spilled out into the world, forcing me to choose between my personal peace and the public version of me that others were constructing. I needed to act, but I didn't want to be the one suing my own family. I knew if this kept going, my dream would slowly die, not because of money, but because of a loss of faith in myself. I started saving messages, screenshots, journaling every conversation where I felt cornered. I didn't want to sue anyone. I just wanted to keep control of my own life. If I don't protect this now, what will I have left that's truly mine when family turns into a weapon? After days of silence, I got a call from Aunt Clara, my mother's sister. She sounded hesitant, like she had rehearsed her words. Olivia, I don't want to meddle, but people are talking. They say you're being too harsh, that you could help Ethan and Ava a little. I bit my lip, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Another person telling me what I should do without asking whether I even had the right to protect my own dream. Not long after, my cousin Mason, whom I hadn't seen in over 5 years, messaged me. Heard from Ava. Can't believe how much you've changed. I understood then Ava was one step ahead, rolling out her own version of events to the extended family. The final dinner and a fracture too deep to hide. One Saturday evening, I was invited for dinner again. I almost declined, but told myself, you need to face this. You can't keep hiding. When I walked in, Ethan and Ava were already seated with my parents beside them. The smell of roast chicken filled the air, a familiar comfort masking a room set up like a polite interrogation. After some awkward greetings, my dad cleared his throat. Olivia, we understand your point, but could you reconsider, maybe not half the fund, but just a portion enough to ease the tension? I looked at him, the man who once told me to live by principle, and my heart cracked. Ava leaned forward and said, honestly, I think this would bring the family closer. No one wants relationships to break over. A few numbers in a bank account, right? A harsh truth. I wasn't their daughter. I was their resource. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. This isn't just a few numbers. It's a plan my grandfather left for his only granddaughter, not a community fund for everyone else. Ethan shook his head. The real problem is that you're not putting family first. That's what hurts us the most. I stood up. I couldn't sit there another second playing the understanding daughter just to appease people who didn't truly listen. If this family only stays peaceful when I hand over money, then it's not family, it's a transaction. I walked out carrying with me a storm of emotion, but also a newfound resolve. I wasn't backing down again. I chose to protect myself even if it meant going legal. That night, I contacted a lawyer who specialized in estate law. She listened calmly as I told her everything. Then she said, "Olivia, what you're experiencing could qualify as emotional harassment. You're well within your rights to stand your ground." She advised me to start collecting evidence messages, call logs, in-person conversations, and said I could consider sending a cease and desist letter if things escalated. I breathed deeply, feeling a strange relief. Not because I wanted to fight, but because for the first time someone said, "You're not crazy. You're not selfish. You're not wrong." I didn't want war, but I refused to be crushed. In the days that followed, I documented everything. Ava's words, Ethan's guilt-tripping my mother's soft-voiced pressure. I created a folder on my desktop titled Self-Defense. I didn't know how far things would go, but I knew this. A dream is worth protecting even if the ones trying to steal it share your blood. People can rob you with violence, but to steal your dignity and sanity, they use sweet words. I thought that after hiring a lawyer and documenting everything, things would calm down. Maybe they'd realize I wasn't the compliant Olivia anymore. Maybe they'd stop out of fear. But I forgot something. People who want what's not theirs often believe they deserve it, and when they're denied, they become dangerous in quiet ways. Sweet words used like blades, Ava shifted her approach. No more direct requests for money. Instead, she started slipping half-truths and passive remarks into every family gathering. "Olivia has such a stable life. It must be nice to be loved by Grandpa like that. Ethan and I are building everything from scratch. Not everyone gets that kind of head start." I said nothing. But I could feel the atmosphere shift. The sympathetic looks toward me were now sharp, examining, as if I were hoarding treasure unwilling to share with the struggling ones. My parents, the silent allies of manipulation, I hoped my mother would step in when Ava made those remarks. She didn't. She just gave a weak smile. I asked her once, "Can't you see Ava's trying to undermine me?" She replied calmly, "She's not entirely wrong. You're the only one in the family who has everything." Everything I'd worked side jobs since I was 17, took out student loans, built my life alone in a city with no support. Ethan stayed home until 24, still got allowance from our parents. Ava's family owned 2 rental apartments in the city. But in my mother's eyes, having everything wasn't about reality. It was the image Ava painted of me. And my mother chose to believe that. The attack was quiet but relentless. I began feeling worn out from the inside, not by loud accusations, but by the quiet comments, the stares, the insinuations. "Olivia must be so busy these days. She barely comes home. I heard she inherited a big trust. Must be planning something really fancy. Hope. We're all invited when she opens that bookstore, huh?" It was as if I was being gently pushed out of the nest I once called home. That nest now felt like a golden cage where every move I made was scrutinized and any deviation from their expectation was branded selfish. Silence hurts more than accusation. I wrote a long email to my mother pouring out everything, the pressure, the pain, the ways Ava subtly painted me as the obstacle to her happiness. I waited for a reply. Just one sentence would have been enough. "I understand." A week passed. Nothing. Instead, I got a message from Aunt Clara. "Your mom's really hurt Olivia. You should be the one to make peace. After all, she's still your mother." I let out a bitter laugh. To them, I was the one severing family ties just because I refused to hand over money. I realized silence isn't neutral. In families, silence is a choice. And sometimes it cuts deeper than words. I sent the legal letter and the masks began to fall. I hesitated for days. Part of me still hoped we could resolve things through honest conversation. But after endless pressure-veiled attacks and my parents' refusal to act, I knew. It was time to defend myself with clarity. With my lawyer's help, I sent a cease and desist letter to Ava, demanding that she immediately stop all forms of emotional pressure, personal attacks, and false narratives about me. The letter was firm but professional. Any further actions will be documented and considered harassment. I reserve the right to pursue legal steps if necessary. I clicked send with trembling hands, not from fear, but from grief. I never thought I'd need the law to protect myself from people I once called family. The backlash, anger, shock, and endless phone calls. 2 hours later, Ethan called. He didn't even say hello, just let out an exaggerated sigh and snapped. "Are you insane? A legal letter to my fiancé? What the hell, Olivia?" I stayed calm. "This isn't about you and me anymore." Ava crossed the line. "And you know that." Ethan scoffed. "She's just trying to build our future, and you're choosing money over family." I answered quietly. "No, I'm choosing self-respect. I'm choosing boundaries. Family or a net that keeps tightening." Later, my parents called. My mother's voice was hoarse. "What are you doing, Olivia? Why escalate this? Couldn't you have just talked to us?" I bit my lip. I had tried. So many times. But every time I was brushed off, labeled as cold, too logical, too different. I did talk, over and over, but no one listened. People only listen when you scream loud enough to hurt. My mother fell silent for the first time. She had nothing to say. A twist of fate, the truth came out by accident 3 days later. Just when things seemed to be simmering down, everything exploded again because of a missent message. Jake, Ethan's cousin and a usually quiet guy, accidentally posted a screenshot in the family group chat I'd been excluded from. It was a text exchange between him and Ava. In it, Ava bragged about manipulating the family, claiming she was just a few steps away from breaking me down with social pressure. She wrote, "She lives in her little book world. Just gotta push her buttons while she's weak." The narrative flipped and I didn't need to say a word. The moment that screenshot started circulating, everything changed. The same relatives who'd been criticizing me began questioning Ava. Ethan went radio silent, and my mother, the one who had always defended Ava, called me at midnight. Her voice choked. "I'm sorry, I was wrong." I didn't say a word. I had no more tears left to shed. I didn't win. I just stopped being afraid to lose. I didn't feel victorious. This had never been a battle to win. I only knew that for once I stood tall. I no longer bowed to expectations that broke me. I began rebuilding, not to erase the past, but to move forward without dragging its weight behind me. Sometimes you don't have to unmask anyone. Just give them time and a little bit of greed, and they'll do it themselves. I never imagined things could turn so quickly. Just one misplaced message, one accidentally exposed conversation, and every polished mask Ava had carefully worn began to crumble. No accusations, no arguments. Truth speaks for itself, sharp and undeniable. The downfall of a manipulator. Ever since Jake's message leaked in the family group chat, Ava disappeared from public view. No more suggestive social media posts, no more beaming appearances at family events. Instead, there was silence. The silence of someone who had just lost control of her performance. I heard from Aunt Clara that Ava had been calling family members individually, saying it was just a joke, that the messages were taken out of context, that everyone had misunderstood her because of wedding stress. But this time no one was buying it. Because greed can't be disguised in a wedding dress. Ethan, disillusioned and unraveling, Ethan messaged me almost a week later. Not to blame, not to plead, but simply to confess. "I'm sorry. I didn't know it had gone this far. I thought Ava was just a little impulsive, but I read everything she sent Jake. He wasn't the same brother who once confronted me at a family dinner. He wasn't the same man who had blindly defended his fiancée. Now he was someone ashamed of how deeply he had been manipulated and how blindly he had played along." I paused before replying. "You don't have to say anything else. Just remember, no one can manipulate you unless you let them. My family learning to be silent at the right time. After the truth came out, my parents began reaching out more often. My mother started texting every morning. Sometimes just, "Did you sleep well?" Sometimes awkward attempts at apology. "I didn't know things had gone this far. I always thought you were strong enough to handle it." I wanted to be angry, but then I realized even late change is still a form of growth. My father, who rarely showed emotion, called me for the first time in months. His voice was hoarse and trembling. "Olivia, I didn't protect you the way I should have. I wish I could go back and do better." I didn't cry, but inside me, frozen for so long, a small warmth returned, like the first spring breeze after a bitter winter. I began rewriting my own story that night. I reopened my bookstore cafe plan. But this time, not with fear or defensiveness, but with the calm of someone who knows her dream belongs only to her. I added a new note to the business plan. Quiet reading room for anyone who needs a peaceful place to ask, "What do I really want for myself?" Because I now understood without that stillness, I might have spent my whole life chasing approval, mistaking it for love. One last time facing myself without blame, I spent that weekend alone. No social media, no family, no friends, just me. A blank notebook and a single question I'd never dared to confront honestly. If I stop blaming Ava, stop blaming Ethan, stop blaming my parents, what am I really angry at? I wrote, "I'm angry at myself for staying silent too long. I'm angry that I kept understanding others while no one tried to understand me. I'm angry that I believed kindness would be returned with fairness." And then I wrote one more thing. "But I know if I don't forgive myself, all I'm doing is continuing to hand them my power." I closed the notebook, and for the first time in months I slept deeply. Trust doesn't come back overnight, but it can begin again. I didn't try to repair everything. I didn't need a perfect family or grand apologies. I just needed small actions enough to see they were truly trying. My mother no longer asked about the money. Instead, she sent me childhood photos, me sleeping beside Ethan, still clutching my worn-out teddy bear. My father, during my first visit back, made me a cup of coffee, something he'd never done before. Ethan didn't apologize again, but on my birthday, he mailed me an old book wrapped in newspaper. Inside was a small handwritten note. "I haven't known who I am for months, but if you still open that bookstore, I'll be your first customer. Healing doesn't mean forgetting, it means the past no longer dictates your future." I started meditating every morning. Not long, just 10 minutes, but enough to hear my own thoughts beneath the noise of others' expectations. I signed up for a short course on small business startup. Not because I didn't know how, but because I wanted this new chapter to begin with intention. Not as a woman bound by guilt, but one who finally knows what she needs. I named my dream bookstore Olive and Light, a play on my name and a reminder of what I had fought through darkness to reach a light that came from within. I now understand no one can rescue you if you're not ready to stop playing the victim. Ava never contacted me again. The family never brought it up again. I no longer needed to know who was sincere or who truly regretted anything, because I wasn't living for their redemption. I was living for my own evolution. I am no longer the Olivia who cried when her brother's words cut too deep, or the girl who trembled under her mother's disappointment. Now I am Olivia, a woman who finally understands that kindness doesn't mean self-erasure. Maturity is not about forgiving everything, it's about knowing what's worth forgiving and what needs distance. 3 months had passed since the drama with Ava. I thought I had finally entered a new chapter, quieter, clearer, and full of hope. I was spending time with myself again, learning how to love the girl in the mirror piece by piece. The plan for my bookstore Olive and Light was taking shape. I had just signed a lease on a small space near an old train station, a place where foot traffic was constant, yet somehow peaceful enough for someone to pause, pull a book off a wooden shelf, and find a part of themselves in a page. I thought I was ready for any storm. But I had forgotten. Not all storms come from the past. Some arrive disguised as goodwill, an unexpected offer. That afternoon, I was testing sample book covers when my phone rang. It was Aunt Marion, my mother's cousin, someone I barely knew, but who had always played the neutral diplomatic relative at family gatherings. "Olivia, I heard about your bookstore. That's really wonderful. Actually, there's something I wanted to ask you privately." Surprised but curious, I agreed to meet her at a quiet riverside cafe, the same one where I'd written the first lines of my bookstore dream. Marion didn't waste time. "Do you remember Tina, my daughter? She used to love reading as a child, but lately she's lost, dropped out of school, struggling mentally. I was thinking if you could let her work at Olive and Light for a while, it might help her recover. It would also bring the family closer." Helping or reopening an old cycle, I didn't respond immediately. Not because I wanted to say no, but because the flood of memories caught me off guard. The offer sounded innocent enough. A young woman lost in need of a peaceful place to heal. And I, the newly recovered one, now appeared to be the perfect person to save her. But I also knew it's from these kinds of just lend-a-hand favors that I once became the emotional dumping ground of my entire dysfunctional family. Marion meant well, I was sure, but her tone, that subtle mixture of concern and quiet expectation, reminded me too much of something my mother used to say. "You're the strongest one in the family. Only you can handle this." And I believed it once. I believed my strength was measured by how much pain I could absorb for others. I thought understanding everyone else made me good, but now I wasn't so sure if my kindness was still a virtue or just another form of self-abandonment. I had saved others and lost myself. I remembered the times I was the first one called when anyone had a crisis. When Ethan failed his college entrance exam, I stayed up all night tutoring him. When Dad lost money in a risky investment, I postponed graduate school to help cover expenses. When Mom was emotionally wrecked after a betrayal from a friend, I listened night after night, even though I was falling apart myself. Each time I told myself, just this once more. But with every once I thinned out, hollowed out, and forgot what I ever needed. Between emotion and reason, I chose what I had never dared before to say no. That night I went home and sat in silence for hours. Then I wrote down 2 columns. Column 1, if I say yes to helping Tina, I'll feel like I did the right thing. My family might view me more kindly. I'd have someone familiar at my side. Column 2, if I say no, I might be seen as cold selfish. I could disappoint Aunt Marion, but I'll protect my own space. I stared at that last line. Protect my own space? Something I never had when I was the old Olivia. So I texted Marion, "I care deeply about Tina, but I need to be honest, Olive and Light is a space where I'm rebuilding myself. I'm not ready to turn it into a healing ground for others. I once feared judgment, but for the first time, I didn't fear losing approval." Marion replied simply, "I understand. Thank you for being honest." I don't know if she really did understand, but that reply felt like a thread being cut a release. I was no longer bound to the identity of the one who can handle anything. I knew if I had said yes just to avoid conflict, I would have fallen back into the same old pattern, pleasing others in hopes of being loved. And I realized sometimes love is knowing when to say no. I haven't lost my compassion. I'm just learning how to set boundaries so that compassion isn't abused. I didn't say no because I don't care about Tina. I said no because I won't turn my healing space into a landing pad for everyone else's chaos. Most importantly, I understand now, no one, not even the people you love, has the right to demand you sacrifice your peace for their comfort. Not every temptation looks wrong. Some are wrapped in opportunity, and the greatest challenge is recognizing the real price you might pay. 1 month after turning down Aunt Marion's request, I had finally found a rhythm again. Olive and Light was quietly taking shape. Each day, a few readers would wander in, students looking for a study nook, quiet souls in search of peace, or the occasional elderly gentleman who simply wanted to sit by the window and listen to the rain. I never intended for the bookstore to become a hotspot or a money-making machine. I just wanted it to sustain itself and me. But then, as always, an offer came when I least expected it. A stranger and a business card I couldn't ignore. It was a soft, rainy afternoon. I was rearranging the healing and inner peace section when a man probably in his early 40s stepped in. He dressed simply, but carried the focused gaze of someone who wasn't just passing by. He spent a long time browsing. Before he left, he approached the counter and handed me his card. "I'm Mr. Lamb, representing a youth cultural investment fund. I'm very impressed by this space. If you've ever thought about expanding or collaborating on a deeper level, we should talk." The card was thick, embossed, expensive. After he left, I stared at it for a long while, equal parts excitement and suspicion. Opportunity or a sugar-coated trap? That night, I looked up Mr. Lamb's fund. They'd invested in several cafe chains that had exploded in growth, slick branding, dozens of branches, unified playlists, even curated table layouts. I asked myself, if this place grows fast, would it still be olive and light the way I dreamed it? I'd always wanted a free space somewhere I wouldn't be forced to sell only trendy titles or post monthly promotions with pre-approved hashtags. I wanted readers to sit down with a dusty book, no pressure to order, no pressure to post a selfie, when identity collides with conditions. 2 days later, I agreed to meet Mr. Lamb for a conversation. It wasn't a pitch meeting, just tea and talk. He started smoothly. "You've got vision, but without momentum, it's hard to last. Our fund won't pressure you to change, just offer structure to help scale." Then he handed me a draft proposal for a potential Olive and Light franchise, a sleeker, modernized logo, uniform seating and shelving layout, books sorted into 10 standardized categories, monthly marketing campaigns with social media hashtags. I looked at the plan and felt a strange discomfort. It was all professional, but none of it felt like me. Growth or staying true to myself. That night, I stayed up thinking, not because I didn't know what I wanted, but because I feared admitting that what I truly wanted might mean giving up the chance at rapid success. I grabbed a pen and paper and wrote down 2 words: values and speed. Then I asked myself, if Olive and Light expands rapidly but loses its warmth and freedom, would that really be a win? If I say yes just to get funding, but wake up each day in a space that no longer reflects my soul, could I ever feel proud again? I didn't have all the answers, but I knew this much: I hadn't come this far just to sell my soul for scale. Saying no doesn't mean giving up. 3 days later, I called Mr. Lamb. My voice was gentle but firm. "I'm grateful for the offer, but Olive and Light isn't just a business. It's an extension of my healing. I need to keep that spirit alive." He was quiet for a moment, then replied, "I understand. Sometimes preserving the original essence is harder than expanding." When the call ended, I didn't feel regret. I felt light, like I just put down a burden that was never mine to carry. Walking your own path is lonelier, but far more real. I knew I had just turned down what many would call a dream offer: investment, visibility, rapid growth. But I also knew that success looks different for everyone. For me, success was when a student walked in, chose a random book, and whispered, "This place really feels peaceful." When a middle-aged woman sat reading for 3 hours undisturbed and left with softer eyes, as if something heavy had been lifted. When I turned on the lights each morning, looked at this tiny room and said, "This is the world I chose, and I belong here." If you don't define your identity, others will do it for you. I put up a small sign near the counter, handwritten, "Olive and Light is not a bookstore for the masses. But if you need a place to breathe, to be silent, to be yourself, we've saved you a seat." Sometimes people don't return to reconnect, they return to stir up the things we thought were already at peace. The first winter of olive and light arrived like mist, soft, quiet, almost invisible at first. I placed a small electric heater near the window and folded warm wool blankets for readers who stayed long. Each morning as I opened the shop, it felt like caring for a little home, just enough to slow down to breathe, to not have to pretend to be strong. I thought everything was calm, but as I once read, peace that lasts too long is often an invitation for the past to knock. The person I never expected to see again walked in like she'd never left. It was a bitterly cold afternoon. The shop was empty. I was stacking books when the door shuddered in the wind. And then, Ava walked in. I didn't recognize her at first. She was thinner, her hair cut short, wearing a charcoal gray coat. But her eyes, the same sharp gaze I once knew too well, hadn't changed. Beneath them, something unspoken stirred. "Olivia," she said, "I know I probably shouldn't be here, but I need to talk to you. An apology or another performance." We sat in silence in the corner by the window. No coffee, no tea. Just two people once close, then broken, sitting like shadows in a scene from an old film. Ava looked straight at me. I was wrong. From beginning to end, I got caught up in the feeling of being admired, being sided with. And when I saw you standing strong, I got jealous. She paused, looking down at her hands. "I know no apology can undo what happened. I'm not here to be forgiven. I just wanted you to know. I've realized who I was and what I did. A shocking confession and a secret long buried. I said nothing. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't naive either." "Is there anything else, Ava?" I asked calmly. She swallowed hard, then pulled a small envelope from her coat pocket. She placed it on the table. "This is a printed copy of a message thread from Emma Ethan's ex-fiancé. She sent it to me 2 years ago. I ignored it back then. But recently I reread it and realized she wasn't just manipulating Ethan. She tried to pull me into a plan to investigate your trust fund." I froze. "Why are you giving this to me now?" My voice was dry. "Because I thought staying silent would keep me uninvolved. But now I realize silence is just another form of complicity. Truth doesn't always set you free, sometimes it weighs you down." I took the envelope. Inside were printed messages, fragmented, but enough to reconstruct the truth. Emma, once the center of that emotional storm, had deliberately reached out to Ava. They had discussed ways to extract information about my inheritance by sowing division between me and my family. I read every line. My eyes didn't tear up, but deep inside, an old wound reopened, no bleeding, but a familiar ache. "You know, Ava, the worst part isn't the betrayal. It's realizing I was right to doubt. But I still chose to believe the best in people." Ava nodded. She said nothing else, just left the envelope and stood up. "I won't bother you again. You don't have to respond. Just keep living the way you deserve to." At a crossroads between silence and confrontation, I sat alone, staring at the envelope, watching the late light angle through the window glass. One path held truth that deserved to be revealed, to clear my name, to expose the manipulation. The other offered the peace I'd worked so hard to build. After all the chaos, finally something steady. If I sent these messages to my parents, to Ethan, maybe they'd understand. Maybe they'd apologize again. But would that truly make me feel lighter, or just reopen a family courtroom we were all exhausted from? I closed my eyes. And then I knew I don't need to prove I was a victim. I don't need to win the past. I just need to keep walking as someone who understands truth is light, but not all light needs to shine on wounds that are starting to heal. Forgiveness isn't for others. It's the gift you give yourself to move on. That night, I closed the shop early. I placed the envelope in a memory box, the one that holds old letters, family photos, and unfinished dreams. I didn't burn it. I didn't forget. I just chose to store it where it no longer had power over me. And as I turned on the bedroom light, I smiled. Because I knew I'm no longer someone who hopes to be understood. I am someone who understands myself, and that's enough. One day, you'll sit down, not to blame the past, but to thank it for teaching you how to love yourself. The bookstore had entered its final days of the year. Cold wind slipped through the door frame, carrying with it the soft scent of incense from a nearby tea house. I set up a small table with paper and pens where visitors could write their New Year wishes if they wanted to. No pressure. An elderly man wrote just 2 words, "Peaceful heart." A university student scribbled, "Just pass my finals, please." A woman stood for a long time, then quietly dropped a blank slip of paper into the glass jar. Watching them, each person, each life, I suddenly understood not everyone longs for more. Some wishes are so simple we only realize their worth once they've slipped through our fingers. I wrote to myself, but to the version who never got a proper embrace, New Year's Eve was near. I pulled out a sheet of paper, an old ink pen, and began to write. Not for anyone else, but for the Olivia of the past, the girl who stood in the wreckage and didn't dare to cry, who forgave to avoid losing people, who pretended to be okay while quietly breaking apart. To you, the girl who thought she had to be perfect to be loved. You tried so hard, and I see that. No one ever taught you how to cope when the people you trusted turned away, when the truth was twisted, when kindness was mistaken for weakness. But you kept walking slowly, sometimes falling, sometimes wanting to quit, but never truly giving up. I know there were nights you couldn't sleep, not because of the pain, but because you kept wondering, was I wrong for just wanting to keep something for myself? I looked back, and for the first time I didn't need to be strong. I paused. A tear slipped down, not from sadness, but release. For the first time, I wasn't writing to accuse or to pretend I was fine. I was writing as if to wrap my younger self in a warm embrace. I used to think forgiveness was something we gave to others. But now I understand forgiveness is how we unchain our own soul so it can breathe again. Finishing the letter like a quiet ritual of closure, I kept writing slowly, gently. Each sentence felt like a breeze brushing against old scars. You once believed that silence meant weakness, but I want you to know it was because you didn't react with rage, because you chose stillness, that you didn't lose yourself. You weren't wrong for setting boundaries. You weren't selfish for saying no. You weren't a failure for walking away from a toxic relationship. You were simply learning to love yourself in the way you should have been shown from the start. And if someday you feel empty again, I hope you won't be afraid. That emptiness is not a loss. It's space waiting for something new to arrive. I placed the final period, folded the letter carefully, and sealed it in an envelope. On the outside, I wrote, "To the one I used to be. Not everyone will come back, but we should return to ourselves first." I stood up, opened the window. The night wind was cold but gentle. In the distance, the first fireworks of the city sparkled across a violet sky. I no longer waited for my parents to call and apologize. I didn't need Ethan to express regret. I no longer sought anyone to see the truth on my behalf, because now I had seen myself. Clearly, gently, completely. A wish not for the future, but for the soul within. I returned to the table and wrote a New Year wish for the first time in years. May I be calm enough to face uncertainty. May I be clear-minded enough not to be led by others' expectations. And may I always remember I deserve a kind life, even if no one else says so. I folded the slip, dropped it into the jar. Outside, someone turned on music. A soft piano melody filled the air. I smiled. Olivia, that girl I once was, hadn't just survived. She had become herself. The end. Thank you for walking with Olivia on this healing journey, one not easily understood by all, but always worth it for those brave enough to take the next step toward peace.